Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here, and I am back with the fourth installment for What Would Kelly Make? Here's just a quick snapshot of the parcels I had to choose from. I ended up choosing the parcel that included Roses for You and the Drawn Hearts background. And typically when I am trying to choose what kind of, which parcel I'm going to go with, it's usually based on the technique I want to do. So as soon as I saw the drawn background, I thought, oh my gosh, I could do the black embossed resist. I love bright colors, and I especially love them on black or with black included in there, because I just feel like it really makes the colors pop. So what I'm doing is I'm starting off with a white cardstock, and I'm going to do a distress ink background. I wanted like an ombre that would go from white down to a dark red. So I'm starting with the picked raspberry, and I'm taking that about 3/4 of the way up the card. I'm not being too concerned about how much or how good my coverage is at this point, because I'm going to be adding so much more ink to the right hand side of the card. And I say right, it's actually the bottom, but for our view right now, it's the right-hand side, that I'm not really concerned. I just want to get a good blend from the pink to the white, and then I will go in with my next color, which is going to be the Candied Apple. And I'm not taking that up nearly as high. I'm not covering all the pink, just getting it to blend. I went through the Fired Brick and then down to the Aged Mahogany, which was just barely on the bottom. And then I'm going to work my way back up. And this is why I wasn't really concerned about the blend of the pink until I got to this stage. And you can see how solid the blend is on the right. So once I was happy with the way that it blended, I'm showing you, so we're going to do an emboss resist. Distress ink is made to emboss with. So if you don't heat set it in between, you're going to have this. And so you want to make sure that you don't skip this step. Like, every technique has a step that if you skip, it's going to ruin the whole thing. The heat setting is that step in this technique. So once I had checked it and made sure nothing was sticking to it, I'm going to go ahead and use my embossing buddy to just go over the whole background. I'm going to ink my stamp up with Versamark ink. I just find it easier to stamp full backgrounds by keeping the stamp up and then placing my cardstock on top. But you do it however works for you. This is just the best way that I have found that works for me. So once I flip the cardstock over, I'm going to hold it in place and put just a scrap piece of copy paper over the top. I'm going to keep one hand still holding the cardstock and move the other one around, applying pretty good pressure, because I want to make sure that I get good coverage and that my embossing powder is going to stick. That's basically what makes this technique. It's kind of like making your own pattern paper, but there's several different stages that you could stop. Watermark ink without embossing will leave that shiny kind of heart look, which is totally fine. I'm going to add clear embossing powder to my piece, and then I'm going to heat set that as well, because that is the technique that I'm doing. But again, even just heat setting the clear embossing powder gives really subtle shiny hearts, which is super pretty in and of itself. So we're going to watch the little magic of the embossing powder setting, which is still, after however many years I've been doing this hobby, still a little bit of magic. And then from here, this is where we're going to get the vibrant colors on a black background. I'm going to take the black soot distress ink, and I'm going to take my ink pad directly to the paper, and I'm going to just smush it all over that beautiful background. It is kind of a messy technique, but I just feel like it's such a cool look. It's totally worth it. I'm just going to grab a paper towel to kind of hold that in place so I don't get black ink all over my fingers. This particular stamp was not terribly intricate, and it wasn't too hard to get in with in between all the pieces parts with just the ink pad. But I've done this in the past with other ones with words, and it can be kind of hard. So when that happens, I just use the ink blending tool to just kind of blend it in. I'm going to buff over my hearts with a dry paper towel just to get off the first layer of ink, because these aren't really going to start to pop until we get the layer of black that's over the clear embossing. So this is just my stamp cleaning chamois that I have. and I'm just going to go through. It's only slightly damp, and I'm just going to start wiping the top of it very gently. You want to be careful because the Distress ink, the black Distress ink, you can wipe it away since it's based in water, but just be careful with that. So once that's done, I'm going to set it aside to dry, and then I'm going to move on to the focal point of my card. I am going to be stamping and masking this, and then because I'm going to be cutting it out. So I stamped the heart first. All these stamps are included in the Roses for You, and then I'm just going to mask that and kind of just build up these flowers around it. I really wanted to use this large rose, but it's attached to a stem. You know me, that's not going to stop me. I'm just going to only ink up the parts that I want to use. And I tried to make them fairly symmetrical for the right and left side. They aren't exact copies, but I wanted the volume on each side to be pretty similar. So, like I said, I'm just going to stamp and mask as I go, filling in the different size roses that are included in the set, and then the leaves. My original intention was to just go straight pink and green. It didn't end up happening that way, but I'm totally cool with it. Once I have all my stamping done, I'm going to remove the masks and then get into the Copic coloring. So like I said, my original intention was to stick mostly with the pink. Even though I used a lot of reds in that background, the Candied Apple does have a more pink feel to it because it's so bright. So, but I wanted to show you, even though the heart didn't end up staying like this, I wanted to show you everything that I did, just so you could see kind of why I had some of the issues I had later. So I just filled it in with all in with my lightest color, and then I'm going to go in, do some shading from the bottom, and I'm going to try to leave a highlight on the left hand side closer to the top and the right hand side almost in like a comma shape. And then do a lot of the darker blending more towards the bottom. I had watched a video recently, I think it was by Sandy Olnack, where she talks about leaving a peanut shape at the top to give a more rounded look, and that works too. So this is just, however you decide you want to leave your highlight. So I'm just moving out from my lightest color out to my darkest, and in this case my darkest color was an R29 because I did want it to be set apart a little bit from the roses. Turned out that wasn't enough. They were almost exactly the same color. So I ended up having to switch that up at the end, but like I said, I wanted you to see the whole card from beginning to end, all of everything, good, bad, and ugly. So once I had those areas kind of filled in, then I'm just going to go over the whole thing with this is my second lightest color. I'm filling in the rest of those areas, and then the highlight will be just my lightest color. And there isn't anything inherently wrong with the way this heart is colored. I liked the color, but the problem was I liked it so much that I used it on all of the flowers too. For these particular flowers, they are very simple shapes. There's not a lot of detail drawn into them. And I think that they're super cute. They're very whimsical. But it does sometimes make it a little difficult to see where that shading should go. So it took me a second to kind of map it out. And that's why I am starting with my darkest color. Because I knew I was just going to be doing really thin lines. A lot of times I don't start with my darkest color because I get nervous about either A, going too dark, or B, not being able to cover up a mistake if I make one. But here I just really felt like it was going to be fine if I just started with my darkest color. So you can see that in doing what I did, I left a lot of area for a quote-unquote highlight, and it was too much. So I went back in with my darker color, and I basically colored it twice. The second time around, expanding the other colors out a little bit more so that the highlight wasn't such a wide area. It was more what would make sense for that flower just on the edges. And yeah, it was all in all, I was pretty happy with how it was until I colored the second flower. And this is one of those things that, card making, any kind of design really, is always very fluid. I'm checking to see that my pinks match because I have a matching problem. But it's always very fluid, and especially for me, I'm not, you'll hear me say the phrase, I'm not married to it. And a lot of times I'm not married to it. I think that having an idea in your head, and or even just in life really, of the way that things should be, or it has to be exactly this way, is a recipe for disaster and disappointment. Disappointment is rooted in expectations, people. So try to be more fluid and don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, it's just a card. It's meant to be fun, and it's meant to be relaxing. So here's where I realized that I really didn't have any depth. So I picked a darker RV, and then I went back in and added some shading to my first flower, and then I liked that so much better. So much better. I mean, even just like, it was just a couple of little lines. So then I incorporated that into the rest of the flowers. So I had some real contrast. Just because the RVs are very pretty colors, but they're kind of difficult to work with. You'll have some that, like the RV02 and the RV04, aren't anywhere close to each other on the color scheme, but then the RV04, 06, and 09 are nearly the same color altogether. So it's hard to get really good contrast without those dark colors. So if you're building up your Copic collection, remember that. So here's where I realized everything is just pink, 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 pink. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Steel Magnolias, but it makes me think of the Mama, my colors are blush and bashful, and she says, honey, your colors are pink and pink. That's what I had going on here. So I coated the heart with a R35 just to see if I was going to be happy with making it red, but I realized I lost all my dimension, so we're going to have to go back and fix that later. But right now we're moving on to the leaves. So the way that these leaves are drawn, the center of them has a little line in it, which is curved, which gives the impression that one side would be more, what's the word I wanted? It would be, I guess, lower, or more, what, concave. Hello! Oh my gosh, that was a struggle. I have a college education, I promise. Anyway, it would be more concave than another. So I tended to color them really more with one side darker than the other. But there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. So now this is where we said, I'm happy with the way that everything looks except for that heart. So I know I want to go darker to give myself some more contrast. And so I'm basically going to color it the same way that I did the first time, like where all the shading is going to be and trying to leave the highlight. I'm just going to be doing it with some reds. Except one of my markers was drying out, and I didn't pay any attention to it until I was putting it down, and by then it was too late, and I got some super kind of shiny areas, and those super kind of shiny areas won't blend. They won't, people. You'll just smear it around. I don't know why that happens. I think it's the alcohol that's drying in the tip of the marker. But anyway, so this is me realizing I've gotten some shiny areas. I'm going, and you can see on the base of it where that's not blending. It's just not. The darkest color is not blending with what I have going on. It's just like getting streaky. But I had come this far. Like, there's no going back. This is what it is. So I tried to just kind of make do with the blending. It really was not happening. I was scared to get too heavy-handed with it because I didn't want it to bleed out into my roses. So thank God for the colorless blender, ladies and gents. So I started, I didn't take it all the way out to the edges because, like I said, I was very nervous about it bleeding out into the roses. But I did what I could to remove the color from the center of it, and then I just coated it with a R35. It's still not blended the best, but I knew my sentiment was going to go over top of it, and I was banking on that being a distraction. So I used my white gel pen to just kind of play up the highlights on the roses, and then I prefer to outline all of my images. I just feel like it makes things pop a little bit more, so I'm doing that with a journaling pen. I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut this out. So when you're fussy cutting something, you want to take off all the excess paper because the paper will pull as you're cutting, and it makes it very difficult to get a smooth edge. Second tip is make sure that you're holding your scissors in the same position and you're using your opposite hand to move the paper. This gives you a much smoother cut and it makes it much easier to get into those smaller areas. Once everything was cut out, I'm going to use a Memento Tuxedo black marker to clean up my edges. This just gives it a more finished look. So if you had any edges that got weird or jagged, this kind of disguises those. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment right on top of this, and I'm going to heat emboss it. So they have this super pretty love script in this stamp set, but it's an outline. And I really, really loved it, and I thought, like, this would be perfect. I wanted to use the white embossing powder to kind of make it pop. Since I had the black background, my card was pretty dark anyway, so I wanted something that it was going to pop off the page. But because of how busy everything was, the outline didn't really stand out the way that I wanted it to. So I'm going to just go ahead and stamp the U. This is part of a much larger sentiment, so I'm using a post-it note to just mask off all of the stuff that I don't want. I'm going to ink it up with my Versamark and go ahead and heat emboss it so it says love you. I'm just using the U part of it. This is a great way to stretch your stamps and get more bang for your buck. I'm always all about that. So once that is heat set, which only took just 1 second because it was so tiny, I'm going to go in with the love and fill in those letters. So the other part, which I don't even know where my footage went, guys, like, I don't know where it went, disappeared into the land of the gremlins. I used the stitched rectangle die and cut out a frame. I popped that up on some Scotch foam tape, and I ended up adhering it just slightly off center, just to give it like a little bit of character and to make that focal point pop up off of the dark background. So that's the entire card. I hope that you learned a little something. I hope that you will give this technique a try. I promise you it is so super cool, just to see those bright colors on that black background. If you have not seen the technique video, that is something else that's up. It basically just shows you how to do the background if you want to watch that again. And so thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll catch you on the next video next month.